Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to in-person Munch and Learn. Today we have a special treat. We have a man who needs no introduction, the Dixon's own director, Kevin Sharp.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction. You know what? I know I'm not sure I can do one of these from a podium. You know, I'm usually a little bit on the move, and I don't know whether it's COVID or being quarantined for, you know, or any of the stuff that we've been through. But I found as I was putting this PowerPoint together for Munch and Learn that even I was kind of finding it slightly digressive. So be prepared for that. The main theme of the talk is about Charles White, the artist Charles White, who's in the Black Artists in America show. But it's kind of about a lot of other stuff as well. And so we'll just get it started. Okay. Yeah, I thought
It's supposed to. There we go.
There we go.
Here's the arrows.
Okay, just takes a little time to warm up. So Charles White. This is Charles White in about 1941. He's photographed by the great Gordon Parks, the great photographer Gordon Parks, who Charles White is sitting in front of his planned mural for the struggle for liberation. And that mural was intended for the George Cleveland Hall branch of the Chicago Public Library. And which, you know, this was a major commission for young Charles White. He's maybe 22, 23 years old when the commission comes through. This is the library where it was intended to go. He's working on it in 41, 42 as he turns whatever, 23, 24. But White's mural was never installed. And this is basically the only record of this completed panel. It was one of two panels for the installation. And part of the reason why it wasn't installed is because of the date. Because of the date it was made. When the commission was offered in 1940, it was a very different country. The United States was a very different country than in 1942, once we had entered the Second World War. And so works of art that had a kind of overtly political theme were less desirable as public art projects than they'd been just 2 or 3 years earlier, and certainly true of a decade earlier. And again, this is Charles White probably posing for Gordon Parks in front of the mural. Now, I've told the story of seeing my first Charles White drawing perhaps 100 times during the last 30 years. And you know, I apologize if you've heard it before, but you know, it never gets old. My first encounter with a work of art by Charles White took place at the Art Institute of Chicago, but probably not in the way you're thinking right now. It was 1991, I will tell you that. And this is the Art Institute of Chicago in 1991 when I worked there. You know, I often went to work in a horse-drawn hansom cab in 1991. But you know, no, the reason this is probably 80 years earlier, but the reason I'm showing is, and the reason I found this particular image interesting is that so much of the Art Institute of Chicago that I knew that, you know, that was not so much unchanged from this photograph right here. When I started at the Art Institute of Chicago, I worked in this part the old building. Now, of course, they did, there were any number of major additions to the Art Institute between when this photograph was made and when I got there in 1991, but they might as well, you know, they all might as well have not have happened as far as I was concerned, because I worked in, and this is a more recent view. When I worked at the Art Institute of Chicago, this Alexander Calder was installed. It's still there. It's called Dragonfly. It was supposed to sit in a pool of water, but they never got the water made in it. And this window right here is the window that I looked out of. Now, my office in Princeton Drawings did not have a window. I was in a cubicle, but my cubicle was right outside of the office of the curator of Princeton Drawings, the head of the department. And I could look, and you know, he was always off somewhere, and so his door would stand open, and I could look through his office. Well, here, let me just show you. I could look through his office window, the window I just pointed out to you, down Michigan Avenue and all the way down to the Wrigley building, right, that you see right here. And at that time in my life, I had this, I don't know, I was really quirky about time, and I never wore watches. Now, I could never get away with that now, but at that time I didn't, and I considered the clocks on the Wrigley building to be my watch when I was at work. And just so you can, and that's it, way down there. And this photograph is basically taken from, not from my old desk at the Art Institute of Chicago, but the equivalent of, and there is the clock. Wait, even my camera can't read it. But at that time, my eyesight was so good, I could read it without glasses. I'll also introduce you to the first digression. They have named Michigan Avenue, that's what you're looking at right here in Chicago, in honor of Ed Paschke, the Chicago artist Ed Paschke. And it just so happens that in 1990, the year before 1991, when I first saw a Charles White drawing, I did an exhibition of Ed Paschke drawings from Chicago collections, along with Douglas W. Druick, who was the head of Princeton Drawings, and yours truly, Kevin Sharp. So, and this is the room. This is the Department of Princeton Drawings. It's actually called the Gene and Stephen Crown, Gene and Stephen Goldman Study Center. It houses the Department of Princeton Drawings at the Art Institute. I have no idea who this moke is. I just pulled this photograph off the internet because, well, Julie, it's because this, you know, back in 1991, when I worked at the Art Institute, I wasn't carrying a camera with me all the time like we are now. So I have very little documentation of this moment, and certainly no digital documentation of it. So I did what you know any reasonable person would do, is I Googled it. But I know this room like the back of my hand. I spent 7 years of my life in this room. Most of the hours of those 7 years were spent in this room. At this table is unchanged. These chairs are unchanged. Now, it's had a major renovation, but this was the study room. This is where people would come in and ask for anything. And for the most part, we had it. And you see this little half ceiling here? That's a loft, and that's where my office is. And those windows that I was pointing out to you, they are shining light on this cheerful fellow as he's doing some kind of research in the Princeton Drawing study room. So the room wasn't called the Gene and Stephen Goldman Study Center when I worked there. It was called the Glore Print Study Room. It got named the Gene and Stephen Goldman Study Room a few years after I left. Stephen Goldman, we always marveled at the extraordinary toupees he wore. They were just really incredible. She is a great scholar of Old Master drawings. They had a tremendous collection. They made a major gift to the Art Institute. This is James Inwood, the director. It's probably about 2001, 2002, something like that. And this is a beautiful Italian drawing. I couldn't figure out, I thought I could find who the maker of that drawing was, but I never could figure it out. My point is this, you know, at this time, we're having this celebration. Jim Wood's in the Gene and Stephen Goodman Study Center. you know, his name right up here. You can see it fairly clearly. And this is the ceremony, you know, and everybody's really excited because look, there's another drawing from the Goldman's collection going to enter the drawing. But here's the thing. At that point, I would guess the Art Institute of Chicago probably already owned 3,000, maybe 4,000 Italian drawings, prints and drawings. Guess how many drawings by Charles White they own? 0. Goose egg, not a single one. This is Charles White making a drawing, probably sometime in the 1960s. So here we are, back in the print room, the print study room. It is 1991. Well, not in this photograph, but in our imaginations, it's 1991. I'm in there. I'm in this room. It's right at 5, and I mean the place is emptied out. I mean, a lot of people worked in that department. I mean, I would guess, I don't know, at least 20, 25 people worked in the Department of Prints and Drawings, including me, but they'd all gone for the day, with the exception of 3 of us. I was there, and my good friend, this is Mark Pascal. He and I started at about the same time in 1988. He's now the Janet and Craig Ducasis Curator of Prints and Drawings. A super knowledgeable guy. We started at the same time, but Mark was miles ahead of me. He's an artist. He taught at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. He knows more about printmaking than any person alive. He is a student of modern drawings. He's a scholar. He's an artist. He's just a brilliant guy. But in 1991, when we were in the study room together, he was an assistant curator. And here's a photograph of what he looked like in 1991. The guy literally has not changed. He's totally a timeless individual. And then the other person who was in the room still after 5 on that day in 1991 was Douglas Druick. And this is a photograph that accompanied a flyer that the Art Institute sent out when he retired in something like 2015, 2016. And this is Douglas right here. And they're in the galleries of the Prints and Drawings galleries. And this is Suzanne Folds McCullough. And of all things, they are inspecting in I think 1989 or 1990. They are inspecting my exhibition, the first exhibition I did really for the Art Institute, which was called Altered States, the printed image and the dynamic of change. And, you know, they're not only sizing it up, they're totally signing off on it. They, you know, these pictures don't get off the floor unless Douglas says they get off the floor. Douglas Druick is easily the most formidable curator of our age. Nobody can touch him. This is him when he was director of the Art Institute about 25 years later. And I'll just point out some of his titles. He was the Prince Trust Curator of Prints and Drawings. And that's a huge job, but it wasn't a big enough job for Douglas. So when the position came up, he also became the Searle Curator of European Painting. And then, and he held that double appointment for, I don't know, for 20 years or something like that, and did amazing exhibitions. And then he becomes president and Eloise Martin director of the Art Institute for about 5 years. So kind of a big deal. And we worked together, as you saw, on an Ed Paschke show. We also wound up working together on an Odeon Redon exhibition. And but he's like a formidable guy. And his area, you know, his area of expertise is 19th century, and but he's in the room as well in 1991. And so the 3 of us are there when we get a call. Let's see if I have one more shot. Yeah, I do. One more shot of this guy sitting in the print room. You know, at some point we have to figure out who this guy is because he's getting a lot of screen time. Anyway, the phone rings. And, you know, Douglas is Douglas. He never answers the phone. You know, Mark, you know, would have answered the phone, but I was closer to it and I'm the junior guy. So I answered the phone, and it is the doc. as we called it. Now, the dock is just what it sounds like. It's a loading dock. And you entered the loading dock off of Madison Street, on the kind of the north side of the Art Institute of Chicago. And it's where every employee entered the museum. And at that time, it looked very much like you were entering a loading dock. I mean, now they've partitioned it off and it looks a slightly more elegant, but only slightly, and it's no longer the loading dock, but I'm telling you, there was a construction-sized dumpster that I walked by every day for 11 years. And so it kind of kept you humble in a way. This is how you enter this incredible place. And so we get a call that there's a guy out there with a giant drawing. And normally at 5 or after 5, we wouldn't have, I don't know why we accommodated this guy, except that, I don't know, we just did. And so I didn't, the one way of entering the Art Institute is, through the front doors. It's right through here. This is a grand staircase, but that's not at all the experience I had. I walked through this building right here, which is the Fullerton wing. Later, I would have an office with windows right there, but you can see right here, I looked and looked for a photograph of the dock just so you could see how kind of grimy it was. But this is all I could come up with. This is the building. So I walk all the way out to the dock, and I meet this guy, Derek Joshua Beard. And he is indeed holding a giant drawing, and it's wrapped in craft paper, and I can't really see it. But we invite him in, and we walk all the way back down the Fullerton wing, all the way back through the Princeton Drawings galleries to that study room, and Derek begins to open up, pull the craft paper off of this object he's hauled in. Now, Derek seemed, Derek knew what he was doing. This wasn't the first work of art he brought into people to consider for purchase. And that was his goal. He considered himself a private dealer, but he was also, he had a penchant for reinventing himself as well. And unfortunately, this photograph I wish I looked for an earlier photograph of Derek on the internet. This was taken much, much later. I was looking for him in 1991, but he looked like he was about 12 years old at the time. But he wasn't even slightly intimidated by the situation he found himself in. He knew what he'd come to do. And he unwraps this amazing thing. And as kind of impressive, as it may look on the screen, it's nothing compared to what it looks like in real life. It's a drawing called Harvest Talk. It's from 1953. It's a charcoal drawing. It's an incredibly sophisticated work of art. And I know for a fact I had never heard of Charles White until that drawing walked into Princeton Drawings that day. Now, I don't remember the first time I saw a Picasso painting. I don't remember the first time I saw a Monet. I don't remember the first time I saw a Van Gogh. I just don't, I could probably piece something together if I had days and days to go through through my photographs and maybe figure it out, but maybe not. But I will never forget the first day that I saw a Charles White drawing. And all I could think of in that moment, when I'm looking at this masterful thing, this drawing from 1953 that looks like it was drawn by Michelangelo, that has the quality and the presence of an old master drawing, but it has, the thematics of a kind of, social realism that, lived maybe 15 years earlier. I was stunned. And the only question I could ask myself was, why had no one told me about Charles White before this? Here's Charles White in the 1950s. He kind of looks the part of an intellectual, and that's because he was. He was a very knowledgeable, very learned man. So as you can expect, I made it my business to learn everything I possibly could about Charles White. And there was a lot of information out there, but it was all coming to me in primary sources. I had to dig deep. There was not a pool of literature. I couldn't go to the Ryerson Library at the Art Institute of Chicago, which has 3 million volumes, and pull out the big book on Charles White, because the big book on Charles White did not exist. So Charles White. This is a drawing from 1938 by Charles White. So this is a drawing he makes when he's 20 years old, and it's a charcoal drawing on paper. It's in the collection of Spelman College in Atlanta, and it's a fairly sophisticated work of art. It's a pretty well executed drawing. It's not Harvest Talk, but it's 15 years earlier. But it's also a study. And if you look right there. There's a reason why it's not so highly resolved. It's because it was a working drawing. It's a working drawing for an image of John Brown in that mural from 1941-42 that I was showing you. And so one of the things that I find interesting, we know that this drawing is from 1938 because he dated it, but he doesn't use it until 2 or 3 years earlier. And that's an incredibly mature thing for a young artist to do, to make a drawing that he's going to save for 2 or 3 years till he has a purpose for it. And just to give you a sense of the evolution of Charles White's drawing style, this is another image of John Brown made in 1949, made a good 11 years later. And you can see, now this is not a study for some other work of art. This is a finished work of art. And so much of Charles White's work will be invested in his incredible ability as a draftsman. And so there's a reason why this looks a lot more resolved than this does. So Charles White is just trying to find his way in many respects, like any young artist who's 21, 22 years old. This is a painting from 1939 called Card Players. But this is what I mean about Charles White. I mean, Charles White grows up he's born and raised in Chicago. He grows up his mother essentially raises him. She's a domestic worker, but she strives to give him every opportunity he could have. He goes to Inglewood High School on the south side of Chicago, which was a predominantly white high school. And you can imagine the kind of experiences he had there, but what he also got the education. He's friends with Elger Corder, another artist who's also in the Black Artists in America exhibition, another African-American artist who also goes to Inglewood. And Margaret Burroughs, who's one of the founders of the Southside Community Art Center, which still exists in Chicago, and is an important supporter of Black artists in the city. These are this moment. It comes after the Harlem Renaissance by a good 10 years, but it's Chicago's version of that movement. And so Charles White has access to works of art. After he graduates from Inglewood, he goes to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and he has access to works of art and to libraries, and he drinks it up. And so it's just a great painting of Card Players from 1939, and he's drawing on traditions. I mean, the old masters painted card players all the time, but probably the most famous card playing painter is Paul Cézanne, and this is his work from the early 1890s. But look how much more dynamic and interesting Charles White is, and I mean, I don't say that lightly. I mean, that's pretty great too, but look at that. Look at the energy, look at the tilting perspective, look at the palette, look at the play of light, that artificial light. I mean, it's an incredibly intentional work. So is this. And Charles White's works become more grounded in a kind of social commentary. This is a work called This My Brother from 1942. It's a painting that the Art Institute acquired in 1999, well after that 1991 acquisition of Harvest Talk. And I think this painting very much relates to this painting, Lust for Bread, which is in the Black Artists in America show, just in the adjacent galleries. And I think, you know, the date that they place on it is 1935 to 1945, but I would guess it's much closer to 1942, the same year as This My Brother. And an interesting thing is that we borrowed this drawing for the exhibition, that Lust for Bread, from Jonathan Green Studios. And for those of you who don't remember, we did an exhibition. Jonathan Green is an artist, a painter. And we did a show here. What year was that, Julie? Oh, it doesn't matter. But we did a show. 2012. Okay, good. That was a test. Anyway, and Jonathan Green came here. He's a great guy, very easy to like person. This is Jonathan standing in front of one of his paintings. He's just he came and he gave just an incredible talk, and people loved it. And among the people in the audience that day, so here's a digression on a digression, was Jimmy Marcellus, the great cornerback in the 1970s for the Kansas City Chiefs, which happened to be my favorite NFL football team. Now, Jimmy Marcellus, they had to change the rules for defensive backs in the NFL because of Jimmy Marcellus, because of his really intense bump and run style. I mean, he wouldn't let wide receivers get off the field or get down the field. And that's a picture of it. And I chose this particular photograph of all the many photographs of James Marcellus I could have shown you, because it includes his 1970 NFL championship, Super Bowl championship ring. And on that day in 2012, the digression continues, he was wearing the ring. He was wearing the ring. And that's how I knew who he was, because he came up to chat with everybody at the end of Jonathan's talk. And I see this piece of hardware on his hand, and I have to ask about it. And he, long story short, actually it's a short story, long. He takes it off and hands it to me, and I put it on. I could end the talk right now. I did. I mean, James Marcellus is well past his prime, but he could still take me. So anyway, back to the story. Back to Charles White, and so the Mural project gets scuttled. It's mostly because of politics, and so he's a little bit in a wayward place, but still working, still making work. And in 1941, Elizabeth Catlett, who's maybe 3 years older than Charles White, has come to Chicago. Now, Elizabeth Catlett, 3 years makes a big difference when you're 21, 22 years old. And she had already completed her degree from, I can't remember where exactly, and had gone on to study with Grant Wood at the University of Iowa. She was the first Black to receive a master's degree from the University of Iowa, and just a formidable artist, and working with a formidable artist. And she and Charles White meet in Chicago. She's staying with White's friend Margaret Burroughs on the south side of Chicago. They meet, they fall in love, and they marry in December of 1941. And White is doing they are Elizabeth Catlett is already very eager to make her way to Mexico, to work with the TGP, actually, which is another exhibition that the Dixon has done, the Taller de Grafica Popular. And Charles White is eager to follow, but they can't. But because of his draft status, the possibility of him being drafted into the army, he's not allowed to leave. He's not allowed to leave the country. He can't get the papers to leave. So they go to New York. And while they're in New York, I mean, they find themselves in a kind of who's who of Black intelligentsia in the city. They become friendly with W.B. Du Bois. They become friendly with Ralph Ellison, with Paul Robeson. They become particularly close with Langston Hughes. They are, in a very, they're in a very, in a very tight circle of really impressive people. And Charles White is going to find himself in those circles again and again and again. And I think it's in part because he's such a gifted artist himself. And so he finds himself with other gifted artists. It just happens, even if they were probably, for the most part, better known than he was. So in 1943, he is finally drafted. He into the Army. He's in an engineering corps. He is actually at Jefferson Barracks, just south of St. Louis. In 1944, there is serious flooding along the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, and Charles White's engineering unit was sent to sandbag and protect cities and towns from being flooded. And he contracts tuberculosis and an incredibly serious illness, and he spends nearly a year and a half recuperating from TB. But while he is ill, he still manages to work to some degree, and he produces this incredible painting of a soldier in 1944, a tempera on Mace Night. It's interesting that he's chosen tempera. I mean, that can be traced to a lot of different sources, including Elizabeth Catlett at a certain point, but also people like Andrew Wyeth are working in tempera at the very same moment. So he's again tapping into materials, ideas, and themes. And as you can see, his work is becoming sort of more stylized in a way. Oh, there's the flood. That's just John Stuart Curry's painting of the flood. It's not even the flood I'm talking about, but it's a good painting of a flood. And so Charles White and Elizabeth Catlett this is actually a photograph Charles White takes sometime in the 1940s. That's Catlett in front of one of her paintings, which at a certain point in the 1940s, it's rather difficult to tell the difference between a Charles White painting and an Elizabeth Catlett painting. They're close. And in 1946, Elizabeth Catlett receives a Rosenwald Fellowship that finally allows them to go to Mexico. And this is a major turning point, I think, for both of them. I mean, Elizabeth Catlett will stay in Mexico for decades. Charles White will not, but the work leaves a lasting impression. I mean, the print on the left is by Leopoldo Mendez, which I think, in some ways looks very much like what Charles White's work will eventually look like. And then on the right is a Diego Rivera mural in the National Palace. And I think Rivera is a huge influence on Charles White. And so he and Catlett come back from Mexico City in 1947 and almost in early 1947 and immediately divorce. It's not really clear what happens in Mexico, but the marriage certainly doesn't survive. But Charles White comes back prepared to create work that is influenced by what he saw among the Mexican muralists and printmakers. And here's his drawing from 1949 of the Trenton Six. The Trenton Six were a group of 6 African Americans who were railroaded on murder charges in Trenton, New Jersey that same year. There's 7 people in there. Yeah, well, one of them is the woman leading them to freedom. a good observation. Yeah, you can see that the 6 are behind the wire. She's not leading them to freedom because honestly, he doesn't know that they're going to be free in 1949, but she is a symbol of freedom, I would say. And then Frederick Douglass lives again. This is another major drawing that's in the collection of the Sheldon, again from 1949. So you see his works become much more topical in a way. They speak to issues of Black identity and Black history. And to my eye, they look very much like work that he made that was influenced by the Mexican muralists. Now, I'll also just point out, he has this thing he does, and it impressed me when I first saw the Charles White drawing Harvest Talk, just how much emphasis he places on the power of hands, the physicality of human hands, how he exaggerates their size, but they have a meaning. And if you think about, an artist who works with charcoal, a draftsman who's drawing, and what's the most important appendage he has? Again, it's his hands. So yeah, Charles White and Elizabeth Catlett divorced in early 1947. I already told you that, and White continues to find himself in compelling circles. I mean, here's his portrait of Bessie Smith. It's in a private collection from 1950. And I'm just showing you this drawing because it's the second drawing by Charles White that we bought from Eric Beard in 1991. This one was acquired towards Derek Beard towards the end of the year. So in 1950, Charles White and Frances Barrett married and returned to New York. It's entirely possible that the Whites faced more prejudice and more difficulties as an interracial couple in the 1950s than all the many indignities that White had already endured on his own. Remember that interracial marriages were still illegal in any number of states. But Frances Barrett, so after the first bout of tuberculosis, Charles White endures, it comes back 2 or 3 times during his lifetime. He becomes very, very ill. And Elizabeth Barrett, not only stands by him, I mean, she cares for him, and this is an incredibly contagious disease. And they face incredible struggles. They get invited to be part of a fellowship, and or White does, and they're not allowed to stay where they're supposed to stay because they're an interracial couple. But White had already had his work shown in an exhibition at the Delgado Museum in New Orleans, and wasn't allowed in the museum to see his own work in an exhibition. Outrageous. So this is an incredible tempera painting. It comes from Art Bridges in Bentonville, and it's from 1951. It's just, it's just kind of, I think, just kind of an amazing painting, and it's right in the galleries as we speak. It's in the Black Artists in America show, and and it shows all these qualities: the huge hands, the impressive stature of the woman, representing our land, pitchfork. And this painting was actually in another exhibition that happened in 2018, a Charles White retrospective, which I'll show you a bit more of later. And it's next to, it was at the Art Institute of Chicago. This is where this photograph was taken. There's Our Land, there's Goodnight Irene, and here's the Preacher, all from the early 1950s. And notice there's something on the label here, and I think that's And that's almost as interesting as dolphins.
I'll permitting Fred to come back. Those are the first two pictures where I see open mouths in any of his work.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that sort of symbolistic?
You know, I haven't really noticed that. I don't know. I don't know. There we go. All right, we'll see if it'll advance again. Okay, yes? Say it again.
The mural.
That wasn't for the Art Institute. That was for a lot. Yes, it's presumed it's lost. It's presumed destroyed. Okay, well, see if we can advance now. And we can. And so I just find this very, very interesting. And this was actually on the label of the painting in the 2018 show at the Art Institute in MoMA. And then it went to LA County. But, you know, it's interesting to me that Charles White would have known this painting. I mean, it's in the collection of the Art Institute of Chicago, Grant Wood's American Gothic, and and the similarities are fairly obvious in some ways. But this is actually Gordon Park's photograph from 10 years later of Ella Watkins, but it's also called American Gothic. And so Gordon Parks is riffing on Grant Wood, and Charles White is in his way riffing on both of them. So in 1951, Charles White takes an extended trip to Europe, and he winds up in the Soviet Union. Now he has already begun to embrace very leftist politics and has joined the American Communist Party. And this is him with a group of Soviet journalists. And as you can read the caption: gathered around Charles White, noted Negro artist and leader of the American youth delegation to the USSR, are editors of the Soviet magazine Agoniak. And I don't know what Agoniak is about, but I meant to look it up, but it just shows the reach that what Charles White is trying to accomplish. I mean, he's putting together all this time except for his army pay for about 18 months in 44, he is piecing together a living from selling his work to a limited number of collectors, but devoted collectors. And one fellowship after another and one teaching gig after another. And he is never, not until much later is he permanent faculty at any college. He's teaching at George Washington Carver High School in New York. He's teaching at Dillard University in New Orleans. He's grappling a life. He's pulling a life together just by hook and by crook. But he's established enough that he can do this. And remember, in 1951, his friend, by this time, Paul Robeson, has already lost his passport because of his presumed allegiances to communist politics. And the UAC has McCarthy's already begun to convene inquiries in 1951. So he is not only, it's one thing to have these kind of convictions. It's another thing to act on them the way that Charles White, and act on them bravely, whether you agree with them or not. He had these convictions and he followed them through. And so he comes back and you see much more, his work begins to look much less like Diego Rivera and the Mexican muralists, and more like the social realists that we see in Soviet art of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And this is obviously, he becomes an advocate for peace. His work begins to be reproduced in the masses and mainstream. This is from February 1953. In 1954, Harvest Talk will be reproduced in this same magazine as Harvest Talk. That's exactly how we know what the title is. And there it is. And see the thing, and I think that title matters. What artists call the things they make is I think really, I mean, it's of course important, but it can be, I mean, here, and this is a drawing, like I said, I've been looking at for 30 years. I mean, I anytime I'm back in Chicago, I have them pull it out because I can. And you can too. All you got to do is make an appointment. Anyway, the thing that I always found interesting about this is the directness of this figure's gaze as he's looking out at us, but also kind of above us. And they're not looking at each other. It's a harvest talk, but they don't seem to be talking to one another. What I feel like, and again, look at that incredibly powerful arm, and the wheat fields. I mean, this is a departure for Charles White. This interest in agronomy. He's a Chicago guy. He doesn't care about farming, but after coming back from the Soviet Union, he's much more interested in where our food's coming from and the nature of work. You get a little bit more context and a little less abstraction in his work, and I think that's important. But what I think is important is what he's done here is the harvest talk. The talk you're having is these farmers are having it with you as you stand before this work. They're, like I said, they're not engaged with one another, and I think that's a very sophisticated thing that he's done. And so he also makes this. Here's a drawing called Work. It's in a private collection, and it's a construction worker hauling some two-by-fours on his shoulder. So this is something, again, this is something different. This is a shift in his aesthetic sensibilities in the 1950s. And then this incredible drawing called I've Been Buked and I've Been Scorned from 1956 in the collection of the Blanton in Austin, Texas. Yeah, and less stylized in a way. Yeah, I don't think it might be cartoonish, but there's a kind of, like I said, a kind of abstraction, a kind of stylization that his work is invested in, and that you're absolutely right. It goes away. It's more naturalistic. It's more real in a sense. Yeah, in a way. So after yet another bout with tuberculosis, the Whites moved to California for Charles' health. It's like you got to get out of New York, you got to get out of the cold, the damp, all that stuff. And so they moved to California in, I think, about 1953, I believe, something like that. Just before he makes this incredible drawing called The Folk Singer, Voice of Jericho, which is actually a portrait of Harry Belafonte, who he becomes friends with. Now, how White manages to enter all of these remarkable circles is beyond me, but he does. And Harry Belafonte will become a formidable collector of Charles White's work. And so this is the only photograph I could find of Charles White and Frances Barrett White. And I'm not quite sure why. Now, maybe if I had time to go investigate the Charles White archives, we'd find something more. But I just suspect. I don't know what I suspect really. But I wonder if the fact that being an interracial couple at this time was incredibly challenging. And that and maybe that's part of the reason that not many photographs survive or existed in the first place. So in the 60s, Charles White's work becomes even more engaged in the political events of the day. This is a Birmingham Totem from 1964, which is, of course, made after the bombing in Birmingham, where the four little girls were killed. This is an incredible drawing, and it's this figure is perched on top of the rubble of that horrible attack. He starts two major series in the 1960s. One's called the Wanted Poster series, and this is number 6, and you can see this kind of all the symbols that are that we're contending with today, Charles White's thinking about, you see the Confederate flag in the background, even the American flag down here. If I could have shown you any number of works, he was very interested in the mother and child theme, and they turn up in earlier works again and again and again. And then they turn up in the late work. Only in the early work, the mother is much more in a position of being able to nurture her child. That's not, here, they're separate. Here's another work from the Wanted Poster series. This was turned into a lithograph, and it's clearly drawn on the on African Americans on a slave ship. Those incredible images. This is from about 1970. His work also becomes a little bit more spiritual in the 70s. And this is a color lithograph called The Sound of Silence from 1978, the year before he passes away. And it's in the Art Institute of Chicago as well. So after nearly 40 years, about 40 years after Charles White's death in 1979, he finally has the kind of big museum treatment that he deserved a long time ago. This exhibition that opened at the Art Institute of Chicago, where I saw it, then went to the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and then closed at LA County. And you can see the Birmingham Totem right here, and there's the one from the Wanted Poster series. You see just the incredible, even though he's working in charcoal, and part of the reason why he doesn't embrace oil paint is because of tuberculosis. But charcoal drawing really did serve him well. And you can see that while he's making drawings, he's not sacrificing anything to scale. These works have this commanding presence. It really was an incredible show. I had the good fortune to see it. And then it all comes back to Harvest Talk. And so this show originated at the Art Institute of Chicago. Sarah Kelly Oler Kelly, at the Art Institute, working in the Department of American Art, organized the show. My good pal, the timeless Mark Pascal, wrote an essay about Charles White as a printmaker in the catalog of that book. And it all started with this drawing and the other thing I should say, and it started with Derek Beard in 1991. The other thing I should say is that when Derek Beard brought that drawing into the print study room, kind of after hours in 1991, I remember it was dark. I can't remember whether it was early or late in the year. I think it had to be early. And Derek, we see this drawing and we just kind of go, this is this amazing thing. And that Mark may have known who Charles White was. I guarantee you Douglas Druick had no idea. This just wasn't his area. As formidable a prints and drawing scholar as this man was, but we all immediately saw the quality and the power of this work of art. And we did what we almost never do. We bring things, even the Dixon does this, but the Art Institute certainly does. We bring them in on approval. We bring 100 people in to see them. We talk about it endlessly. We put it up in the galleries. We do everything. We know this work back and forward before we ever commit to buying the thing. But Douglas essentially said, we're going to buy this work to Derek. Just leave it with us. And Derek was like, I'm not sure I'm leaving it anywhere, and but we finally persuaded him that we could be trusted. And anyway, Derek developed cancer. He fought cancer for years and years. Derek and I talk about him like we're close friends. We weren't. I saw him maybe a half a dozen times after that first meeting. I'd bump into him around Chicago. Like I said, He did some private dealing. He was a fairly significant collector. He did a little developing of real estate. He was a contractor. He did lots of different things. And I hope that he knew that this show was going to happen in 2018. And I hope he knew the important role that he had in that show, because it all started with Harvest Talk. It all started with that drawing. And I'm really, really grateful that I happened to be in the room, at the time when all of that stuff happened. So I go back to the question, why had I never heard of Charles White in 1991? And there are lots of reasons that, like I alluded to it earlier, draftsmen sometimes get less attention than painters in some ways. I mean, it's just seen as a less significant art form somehow. Although you wouldn't say that about somebody like Andrew Wyeth, who I mentioned earlier, who did plenty of watercolors, it could have been, his leftist politics and tendency to root his work in protest, which was definitely, it's popular now, but it wasn't then. And that could have kept him out of the history books. And by the way, I just to make sure it wasn't me being a poor student, I went back and looked. I still have my Gardner's Art Through the Ages, my Jansen, my history of 20th century art. I looked through all of them. He's not in any of them from the era I'm looking. He probably is now. But I would guess the main reason I hadn't heard of him was because he was Black. And that's just outrageous to me, and it was outrageous to me in 1991. And it was the injustice of it all. I was sensitive to that, but more than that, I was pissed. It's like, how dare anyone keep an artist like Charles White from me? So, because I was kind of a sponge for that stuff, and I still am. So anyway, thank you very much for coming. Welcome back to In-Person Munch and Learn. Included some really good questions along the way. Are there any more questions or comments? Yeah. I know, he does. And you see it. I mean, when you see, when you go to a show of his work like I did in 2018, you see it again and again and again, this kind of swirling motion that I think you got it exactly right. Creates this kind of dynamism it's usually in the background of the work, but that swirling form really does create an energy that I think is vital to his work. Good observation. And you see it right here.
By the way, on means twinkle or little light.
Yeah. Good.
Russian word.
Ah, okay. Oh, good. Okay. Well, that's kind of like, a lot of newspapers are called The Star. Maybe kind of close to that somehow. Illustrated magazine. Well, there you go. Did you just happen to know that?
No, I actually
Did you? Yeah, that is so impressive. Anything else? Yeah. Yes. No, I did not. There's the painting. Yeah. We were kind of amazed. Okay, let me just explain. The painting Our Land, The Woman with the Pitchfork by Charles White, that we borrowed from Art Bridges, which is the foundation that's associated with the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas. And by the way, that painting, Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, that painting will stay with us when the show closes. It'll be on long-term loan here for 3 years. So that's kind of a big deal and kind of an exciting thing. And we wanted, rightly or wrongly, we wanted that painting to be the cover of the book. And we tried to get Art Bridges. So we're talking about an entity that has even more Walmart money than Crystal Bridges has, and they couldn't get a photograph made. Now that would, and it's, I love those people. They've been incredibly good and incredibly generous to us, but it made us crazy that, that this billion-dollar foundation, or I assume, couldn't get a photograph made that was high res enough for us to put on the cover. And so we had a very good second choice, and I love the work that's on the cover of the book, but that was that we tried to get that done and couldn't. And I'll just add that the Dixon could get that done in about 30 minutes. But anyway, that's completely irrelevant. But the other thing was, they are hoovering up works of art like crazy. And with the goal, and that's actually a good thing, because their goal is to put those works of art out in the world, to put them in schools, in libraries, in places, in museums, places people go. Alice Walton believes in the power of works of art that can change lives and improve lives. But they're acquiring with such veracity that they don't always know exactly what they have, and they can't always get the things they have photographed properly. Anyway, so this incredible Kemper painting, Our Land, from 1951, that's in the Black Artists in America show, comes to us. And I wasn't there when it happened. Julie, what happened? You turned it over?
We opened the crate and we were like, oh my God. And it's just this incredible drawing on the back of that.
It's a double-sided painting.
That we didn't know about.
And they had to have known about it, but they didn't tell us.
What happened was I finally got in touch with them because we were going to have the photograph to put on a label next to the painting, which is in the gallery now. You can go see it. And I called them or wrote to them to ask for permission to do that. We were going to take it off the wall to get a photograph. And they said, "Oh, you found our little secret that was hanging on the back." And I was like, "Why didn't you tell me? We would have put that in the book. We would." I mean,
Yeah.
Whatever. But it's just like having said, one of those things. And now we did find it, and so you can see the drawing on the back, which is much more active.
Yeah.
Than than the main image. One of those surprises that happens during every installation. That was a big.
Yeah, there's usually a surprise, but we don't usually get surprised by another work of art that we don't know about.
Right.
So anyway, anything else? Yes.
Does the football player live in the?
I don't, his name is James Marcellus, and it's required of every Dixon employee to know that. Number 40. And I think he lives in the metro area. He went to college at Middle Tennessee, MTSU, and I believe was a number first round draft choice of the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's the nicest guy. I mean, he was so incredibly humble. He was a very young player when the Chiefs won the Super Bowl, and like anybody who achieves some success early in their career, they think it's going to happen like this every year, and the way he told the story, it was endearing and charming and very Kansas City Chiefs like. Yes. Oh, it's a sea change, and I mean, well overdue, and what it really is an opportunity. So, let me just say this. So, I mean, it's not direct. It's not, it's more of an oblique curve, but I got interested, in Black art in the 90s. And so I followed it as carefully as I could, and had some, pretty extraordinary opportunities come my way, in part because of it. And when I left the Art Institute, I went to the Norton Museum of Art in West Palm Beach, Florida, where I was their curator of American art for 5 years. And in that time, you know, I spent 2 full days, all day with Gordon Parks. You know, I mean, I was just the guy that, you know, that picked him up at the hotel and brought him to the museum. I mean, he, at that point, gosh, he was probably, he might've been 90 years old at that point, but he was very, you know, I mean, a very robust 90 and super interesting. And we were both born in Kansas. And so we had stuff, you know, we had almost nothing in common actually, but, you know, but we had that one thing. And he was just such an incredible gentleman. And, you know, and so when I'm putting this talk together and I find this photograph of that Gordon Parks takes of Charles White back in 1941, it's, you know, and then, you know, whatever, almost 60 years later, I'm sitting with Gordon Parks for 2 days. We're just talking because there's lots of downtime for him because he's 90 years old and we're about to open this big exhibition called Half Past Autumn, this retrospective of his entire career, and nobody wants to wear him out. And so anyway, and it was just my good fortune to be, and then some of the first works I bought for the Norton's collection as curator of American art were works by Jacob Lawrence, and I bought a Bob Thompson painting early on, and because I attracted some gifts of works by Jacob Lawrence, and I did a little show called the Lawrence Legacy, which included all the works that we had acquired by African American artists, and this is like 2000 probably, or 2001, something like that. And so we kind of got a little bit ahead of the curve. And then maybe 2001 or 2, I borrowed all the original gouaches from Jacob Lawrence's Toussaint Louverture series, which it must be 40 or 50 paintings, you know, little gouache paintings from Tulane University. And we paid him a little fee to borrow all of them. And the show was only at the Norton. And on the strength of that, I was invited to write a book review of the Jacob Lawrence catalog recently. Anyway, because I have an interest in good artists, regardless of whether they're Black or white or Latino or Asian or where, I don't care where they come from. I just like art, and I like artists that do it really, really well. And it's kind of served me well in the opportunities that I've been afforded. And I think it might be, you know, in this age of very legitimate concern about cultural appropriation, I might not have those opportunities today, but I'm sure glad I had them then, because these were just tremendous experiences. But it's where, and I'll stop with this. It's where the opportunities reside, and that's what art history is supposed to be about. I mean, it's like, go find the thing that hasn't already been done 10 times and ferret out every little bit of information you can figure out about that thing. And that's, you know, what we've, you know, I think what really good scholars try to do these days. But it's rewarding to see all the good work that's being done on Black artists in the last 5 years, you know, and we're seeing so many things. It's just, I mean, I was just at the Armory show in New York in September, and once again, you know, I've been doing this a long time. And so it's almost hard to sneak a new artist in on me, but there's a lot of work getting ferreted out by the market, you know, of artists that, you know, I just didn't know. So hope that answers your question. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. Anything else? I've kept you here long enough. It's 1:15, but thank you so much. You're very kind. It's good to be back, isn't it, Elizabeth?
Thank you so much, Kevin, for talking about Charles White. I've actually never heard of him until I saw your talk title. So very formative. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming today. Please come back next week when Heather Nichols of the Brooks Museum will be talking about Elizabeth Catlett.